Good afternoon and welcome to Crime Time with Dr. Debbie. I'm your host, Dr. Debbie Goodman, and we're delighted that you're joining us today for a very special program where we have Captain Jose Pepi Granado, who is a very experienced and expert in a lot of areas dealing with criminal justice, but primarily homicide investigations. And of course, we'll have him reintroduce himself, but he is certainly a friend to St. Thomas University, and we're lucky enough to have him in the classroom to guest lecture. But today's program is a little different from our normal programming, whereby we have a guest, we talk about his or her background, but we've decided for our viewing audience today to really profile and do a deep dive into some of these very significant homicide cases that we're studying in class and that the world is talking about. So, with that being said, welcome to the program again, back by popular demand.
Oh my goodness, Dr. Debbie, thank you very much for having me. It's always a pleasure coming here and imparting knowledge and just having fun doing this. This
Absolutely.
is great.
Well, we love having you. And perhaps for those who may not have caught the episode where we first had Captain Pepi on board, could you just briefly reintroduce yourself so our audience knows all about your credibility and your background and why we wanted to have Captain Pepi 2.0?
There you go. I love it. I'm Captain Jose Pepi Granado. I'm retired, 38 years in law enforcement. And as you know, I have over 27 years in violent crimes investigations, mainly in death investigations, which is my expertise. I'm a subject matter expert in that field. The one great thing is I did 26 years with the city of Miami, followed by 12 years with the city of Miami Gardens, where I started their investigations division, and really just kind of passing on a lot of the good tactics and strategies that I learned from the city of Miami and with my years in the field, making sure that the next generation of investigators gets the grounding that they need and the base so that they can perform their job to the best of their abilities. And as always, it's a pleasure for me to come here and just pass on that information. And as you well know, I'm a graduate of St. Thomas, so big time Bobcat fan.
Awesome. Thank you, Captain Pepi. And we love to have our alum back, and certainly our viewers, our local, state, and federal law enforcement officers, and our students who aspire to get into the field. So, ready to dive right in. And again, we're going to talk about several cases that some of which have been resolved, others are first waiting for trial. So let's start, please, Captain Pepi, your thoughts, your overall views about the quadruple murder that has taken place in Idaho with alleged suspect Brian Kohberger.
Yeah, the funny thing about that, Dr. Debbie, is that when when that case first came out, it obviously made national news and really it went worldwide because of just the heinous act.
Yes.
And when I started listening a little bit more about the case and just watching what was going on through the media, you could see that there seemed to be a bit of that personal touch, because a stabbing, when there's a shooting and things of that nature, that's a distance. There's not that personal touch. But when you have a stabbing, that's a very personal act. That's something where it's you're right there, you're close, and you really are intending to do harm, right?
Right.
And so you're always thinking, could it have been a domestic violence issue? Was there something that went wrong in the apartment? And then I started looking at the case, and when they started showing the crime scene, that kind of struck me a little bit, because their crime scene was so limited. And then they were talking about possibilities of having evidence that was away from the scene. And I was like, always a rule of thumb is for crime scenes is you can always extend the crime scene and make it as big as you want, because you could always reduce it as you realize that there is nothing of evidence of evidentiary value that you can obtain. So when I saw it at the beginning, I was like, wow, that was kind of funny. And recently, they're talking about Fourth Amendment issues with regards to evidence that was found in the home of Kohlberger.
Yes, interesting.
Yeah, it is. It brings now to point to where, and it's going to go before the courts because the defense right now is trying to litigate whether or not to have some evidence taken away that was introduced,
Right.
and they're saying evidence that was found in the trash, and so you're sitting, you're going, that's kind of nuts. So that's
Yeah.
going to be very interesting to see how they're coming about that one.
Very interesting. And just to remind our viewers, of course, my background is a criminologist, author, professor, and I also provide commentary and analysis to several of the TV networks. But what I did and have commented upon with this case is created a theory as to why I think he did it. So I'm calling the theory JAR, Jar, jealousy, anger, revenge. And I think from a forensic psychology standpoint, Brian Kohlberger was jealous of the victims, Maddie, Kaylee, Ethan, Zana, both individually and collectively, because I think they represented a lot of things that he did not. They were friendly, they were outgoing, they were popular, they had a broad social network, and I think it angered him to be, at the time, a 28-year-old who really was apart from, rather than a part of, his own peer group. You know, we don't even know Captain Pepi. Did he ever have a platonic friend to just hang out with, eat lunch with? Did he have any intimate relations? Right. And then I think ultimately the R in the JAR theory was revenge. He took the ultimate revenge. And what we also know, too, by the way, in academia, remember, he was a PhD candidate studying criminology, of all things. And I think he really became fascinated with, intrigued by, other serial killers, to include BTK, Dennis Rader, to include Ted Bundy. Yeah. And I believe ultimately this decision he made was almost like a social experiment to see if he could get away with this mass murder. And if he did, I think he would have gone on to be a serial killer.
I think that makes, you bring up a good point there. The one thing that I'm looking at also, and you brought it up as far as at your JAR, is when you do the victimology, and is there that connection? So where and at what point did they meet? Did they socialize? Did they surround themselves in the same areas? Did they have the same friends? And was there a point in time where he might have tried to become a little bit more than just friendly with one of these victims?
Yes.
And he was rejected?
I think so.
And that's where and that's why I say that it's personal, because of that rage, where you come in and you're so angered at the mere fact that you weren't able to have that connection, that all of a sudden now you are now putting out and manifesting that anger and throwing it at your victims.
100%.
And that's where I'm looking at. The funny thing is, when they were talking about that, and just like, obviously I'm looking at it from the investigator's position,
Sure.
I'm saying, did they do enough of interviews with the friends when they're doing their victimology, where they were able to say, oh yeah, there was a strange individual that was kind of surrounding them, just being around them.
Right.
And those are things that are important, just like where you're coming in with the DNA, and why the defense right now is trying to exclude that, because I know that there was an issue where they did their job through the investigation. They entered some evidence into CODIS.
Yes.
I know that they had an issue where they went to a trash pile to grab evidence, and now they're trying to find out if they had a search warrant to get it. And then the other part, and this is one thing that I tell investigators, is that just don't limit yourself. They went in and went through genealogy.
Right. Investigative genetic genealogy,
Yes.
IgG, we say.
And it is so important to just not think that you've lost track of the case or you stop. No, go to the next level. Think outside the box.
Right.
And see what comes up. And it's true. And it is one of those fascinating cases from the investigative standpoint, because of the tragedy. You want to be able to bring closure to those four families, and at the same time have answers, because it is true. I think that he tried to outsmart that what he was studying.
Yes.
And thought that he was going to be able to go above and beyond
I think
and say, I'm going to be scot-free and nothing's going to come back to me. I enjoy when people say that because there is no, I'm going to be scot-free. It's going to turn around and bite you.
Absolutely. And the likelihood of it turning around to bite the suspect is coming soon.
Yes.
August 2025. Well, thank you so much for your great analysis on that case. And we're going to move ahead to the Gabby Petito and Brian Laundrie case.
Yes.
Now, interestingly, many of the students in our classes are following that one, even though it was a few years ago. But Netflix has done their documentary on it. So, again, how is it that a young couple, and I'm sure you've seen it throughout your career, you know, who are in love and who are planning a life together, which allegedly both Gabby and Brian were. They set out on this summer excursion, and one comes back and one does not.
Yeah, you know, this is where when we do our classes and when we talk to people and we lecture and we speak to family members and those out on the public, when we talk about domestic violence, it's that silent kind of underlining negative issues that's going on in families that no one wants to talk about because everything is perfect,
Right.
so they say.
Yeah.
And we don't want to acknowledge that there is a problem. Unfortunately, in a case like this, you see two young individuals supposedly in love. They're going on their dream vacation before they really become a husband and wife, and they're going to try to see the world. And then you have the incident that occurs where he comes back, she's nowhere to be found. And the intriguing thing there is that law enforcement had the opportunity
To intervene.
to, yes.
Right.
And like in Florida, and I'm sure that other states has the same thing, if there's a domestic violence issue where there's physical evidence of someone being aggravated, then it's law enforcement's responsibility to mitigate, stop, and do and take the right procedures. And so here, if there is a sign of domestic violence, well, and if there's physical, someone goes to jail. Back in the day, early on, it was, do you have a place to stay for the next 24 hours and cool off? It was like that cool off period.
Yes.
Well, as years goes on, you realize that studies have shown that in many cases, there was no cool off period if someone really wanted to do harm you. So they would come back and someone would get hurt. Well, now, that's where it sits here because law enforcement comes in and says, go for 24 hours and then everything is going to be fine because they say they didn't have enough evidence
Right.
to make the arrest. That's a little bit up there considering that you had a witness and things of that nature. The other thing that I found intriguing where the boyfriend comes back to Florida and when the mother of Gabby does the missing persons report, and the law enforcement starts doing their job and they come back to Florida. Well, lo and behold, there's the van. And the moment that they knock on the door, the family says, well, we have an attorney.
Yeah. What does that mean to you as a homicide detective?
Yeah, the first thing, that's a red flag.
Of course.
Because if we're trying to help the individual that's missing, your son is here and you want an attorney, we're trying to find someone.
Right.
You would think that he would really want to be the first one to come out and say, whatever needs to be done, let's do it.
Yes.
And
It didn't happen.
no, as on the contrary, as a matter of fact, as you know, the case winds up where he goes missing,
Yes.
supposedly, without the parents knowing.
Yeah.
And then they go on a search of the area.
And they find him,
and
or
it's
the remains.
And it's the parents that find him.
Yeah, that's...
So with the note and him committing suicide. So in reality, it's one of those sad cases where could it have been stopped early on?
Yes.
There's a possibility. when we do the victimology, was there a history of domestic violence in the past?
There was.
And is there any issues with mental health issues? So these are the things that, when as an investigator that you're putting it together, we close it out, and when we say it in field as a case that you're able to close, it's a murder suicide, and you have the evidence to say yes, those are the facts. But those are the ones where you really want to look a little bit deeper, because there might be another incident that you can learn from this one and say, let's try to at least pass on knowledge to someone else to stop the next one.
Right.
And that's important. It's just
Very important.
and
For
we're
all
very
age
sad.
groups, and
Yeah,
even for our viewers watching.
Oh, absolutely. There's no doubt that, and when we're talking about that, we're talking about domestic violence, and there is no need, if you are in a position of where you feel you're going to be hurt, whether it's verbal, physical, emotional, you need to let somebody know, because it doesn't take much for that go to the next level.
Right.
And that's the last thing that we need.
Exactly.
You know,
Thank you.
so
Yes. Thank you so
A
much.
little PSA there.
No, that's important. Very,
Yes,
very
yes,
important.
yes.
Thank you. Real life stuff. Well, another case that our students are following is the Luigi Mangione case, whereby we have this alleged suspect who, interestingly, was an attendee at an Ivy League college and a valedictorian, and coming from a family with financial means.
Yep.
And he's alleged to have killed the CEO of United Healthcare, Brian Thompson. So, what do you think happened there, and why, and what should happen next?
Let me tell you the funny, I always use the funny when I'm going in, and I say, when you watched the early morning broadcast of the show, you said, oh my goodness, I'm looking at some kind of a mafia movie. Something's going on here. This is so, and then you start getting it was a hit, it was a contract killer, and you're going through all of these, and I'm saying, this is not something that a contract killer does it in broad daylight, in the middle of Manhattan, of all places, where
Yes.
people are walking around. No, there's a little bit more to that. And then they start talking about the ghost gun, and how that's not, and you're going, okay, now we're getting a little bit more into it. The casings that were found had the writings on the casings, and it's now suggesting that the target was the victim only because of his position.
Right.
And so as you start moving along, the good thing was that they were able to contain the scene, where they were able to get good evidence gathering from there. Because of the way New York is, you're able to identify the fact that the individual started going from point A to point B to point C before they lost track of them. But with their real-time crime center and their cameras all over the place, they were able, and that's where law enforcement has advanced greatly.
Yes.
Is that they're able to marry closed-circuit TVs from the field, and it goes into an area of the police department that is just solely dedicated to just identifying.
It's awesome.
And so when people and the witnesses that were on the scene are saying he was covered, you couldn't tell, you couldn't see, but as they did their due diligence and started backtracking, he's sitting at a Starbucks.
Yeah.
And he wants to break up a conversation with one of the employees there. And what does he do? He
Takes the
lowers
mask off, and then we
Yes.
see the smile.
Yes.
We see the eyebrows. Now we're seeing some
And now-
discernible features.
And so now all of a sudden we get into that part of the case where you're now on the hunt for an individual.
Yes.
And then again, law enforcement does a great job there of putting out the information. They're able to pass on the photo that's important. And yes, they lost him in New York, and yes, they find him
Right.
in Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
But it's because of the diligence of the law enforcement putting out that information, passing on that to the public, that someone at a McDonald's
Right.
is able to pick him up and say, hey,
That's
that
the
looks
guy.
like the guy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they get him. Yeah,
Absolutely.
It's crazy.
And you know what I find so fascinating Captain, is, and something for our students to think about, this theory called hybristophilia in our field, whereby people become attracted to and interested in killers, right? We've seen it before. We've seen it with Ted Bundy.
Yeah.
We've seen it with Chris Watts. And it's not just the male offenders either. You know, it's like this fan base that developed for Casey Anthony and Jodi Arias and Susan Smith. So it's very odd human behavior to be attracted to killers.
Yeah, the thing with this case, the interesting part is, in particular with this individual, so he kills the CEO of a healthcare group, and it attracts those that have a grudge against the healthcare system. Now, originally, I said to myself, maybe this individual, Luigi Mangione, maybe he's the one that had a problem or a beef with this particular company, that something wasn't done. But that wasn't the case.
No.
His whole thing had to do with corporate greed.
Right.
So now, the part that is very interesting is the amount of people that have come to his defense and have literally ponied up money
Yes.
to help him. And I think the last I heard, there was like something like $700,000 into his
Unbelievable.
defense account.
Unbelievable.
As opposed to, and so now you're saying, instead of looking at it as what a heinous act
Yes.
of violence,
He's being
people
applauded.
He is.
I know. And then I read something crazy, Captain, whereby he's getting a lot of fan mail, and something on his website, there was a statement, thank you for all of the correspondence, but would you please limit per person 2 letters per person?
Yes.
Can you imagine? Like, how many letters is this guy getting? I don't get it.
No, it's.
But we'll see how that
I
plays
wonder
out.
if it says something about society in itself. you know?
Probably.
Yeah,
Probably.
It does.
Yeah. Well, again, more cases. We go to the next one. And actually, this one is very timely, of course, very sad, where we have, let's call it an unusual death circumstance of the actor, beloved actor Gene Hackman, his wife, and the family dog in New Mexico, each of whom perished, and we're not sure how. So what do you think?
Well, you know that in a case like this, especially when it's a high-profile individual, the media attention is like immediate. It's right there. And there's always that need, or we feel that there's a need to come out right away and say something, as opposed to saying, right now the department is investigating the deaths of so-and-so and so-and-so, and the investigators are proceeding with their investigation. Once something comes up of note, we'll inform you. They come out immediately, they start talking about carbon monoxide. They come out and say, well, there's nothing suspicious right now. But you just really haven't even started the investigation, so how would you know?
Yeah.
Then it's, you get the big one, which is the mummification.
Right.
All of a sudden they have, I'm like, so now I'm thinking mummification. So that means that they've been there for a while if they're at that stage. But then sometimes there are other circumstances. And then as the investigation starts going on, there is the pills, the dog is in the room, the wife is in one room, Mr. Hackman is in another.
Yes.
And now you're going through, is there a medical condition? Was it a murder-suicide?
Oh, wow.
Because those are the things that come into play. And you want to make sure that when you investigate that scene, you're able to gather as much information as possible. And I always go back to the victimology.
Yes.
Who were they in contact with? Well, now we know that the family hadn't spoken to them in almost 30 days. And the last person that saw them were 2 weeks prior, which is the individual that found them.
Yes.
And then we now get information that the last reading of Mr. Hackman's pacemaker was on the 17th.
Wow.
Almost 2 weeks prior. And these are the things that come into play to say, well, what happened? So I always say, let your investigation on scene start, finish, don't release the scene yet, let's see what the medical examiner has to say. Because we need to get toxicology. We need to get any kind of forensics that comes in to suggest that we can rule out foul play, or was it something that other than what we think it is?
Okay.
And those are the things that are so important. So now, and toxicology isn't like we see on TV, right? So on TV it's like, oh yeah, from one moment to the next we already have the information.
Yeah, it takes a long time.
It takes
Yeah.
a while. So in the case of the mummification, in that stage, it's got to be in a dry condition, whether it's hot or cool. It's a dry condition for a certain amount of time,
Okay.
and usually it starts at the areas where there's the lacking, and as you start at the moment of death. So once terminal event occurs, you've already stopped all function.
Okay.
So things start to decay, and there's
Yes.
a process that the body goes through
Right.
in order to get to that stage. So it's going to be interesting to see.
Very
what's coming
interesting.
in. It is. It is. It is.
Well, believe it or not, we may only have time, as much as we'd like to talk to you all day, we may only have time for one more case.
Oh wow. Okay.
So the one more, perhaps, because we know also this would have been our generation where when this case happened, we were right there knowing about it, but our students now are following the John Benet Ramsey case, where we have this, and this is at least 30 years old, this case, whereby a 6-year-old little beauty pageant girl ended up, first deceased, and during a holiday type of party and environment at the family home in Colorado. So in our field, and of course you as the expert know that we never want a case to go without closure, meaning who did it. And
Right.
to this day, decades later, we don't know. But what might be your thought, back to victimology and this little girl, and would it have been a member of the family, or would it be more likely to be just an outside person, or possibly even a pedophile who may have, followed this little girl in her pageantry?
Well, you know what? Obviously, the way that she was being brought up and groomed, she was put out into the public space.
Yeah.
Where, because of the pageants, because of everything that she was involved with, she was well known. She was an outgoing, from all accounts. She was outgoing, very jovial, and just a pleasure to be around.
Yes.
And then you have the incident where you find her, she goes missing, they call, and then they find her in the basement of her home. But there was no evidence of breaking and entering into the house of a burglary.
Yeah.
There was no evidence of any physical fight or disturbance within the house to suggest that maybe there was a struggle. And who was one focus on?
Yeah.
The family.
Right. And they were the focus, all
Correct.
three, meaning mother, father, brother, and each of whom was cleared.
And if I'm not mistaken, they even did 1 or 2 series regarding the incident.
Yes.
To where one of them, if I remember correctly, they were focusing on the brother.
Yes. But the brother would have been 9 at the time,
Right.
Captain Pepi. So there was evidence of sexual violation.
Right.
But then investigators felt the 9-year-old and the 6-year-old, it was highly unlikely.
And that is where we as investigators, as much as we don't want to think of the evils of young children, you always have to keep an open mind. You have to make sure that we don't close that door. And could there have been a possibility where the brother might have killed her, and the family, to protect the brother since they lost one child,
Yes.
are surrounding that and protecting?
Yes.
There's a possibility
There
there.
is, there sure
And
is.
it's still to this day, I think they must have received well over 21,000 tips. They interviewed thousands of people.
Yeah. But could this one be solved one day?
I think that eventually, maybe one day, and it could be at someone's deathbed, maybe they'll come forward and say, look, this is what happened.
Wow.
And it's very sad. It really breaks my heart for her,
Yes.
because at such a young age, at 6, and it's just one of the tragedies, but it's one of so many.
Right.
That we really need to just be on top of that. Yeah.
Well, unbelievable. In a blink, the show started and ended
Really?
with Captain Pepi and all of this great information, and we need to expand the show to an hour for you. But in the 30 minutes, we are so grateful for your time, your expertise, your knowledge that you impart with us. Ladies and gentlemen, as always, we are delighted to welcome you into our Crime Time with Dr. Debbie podcast here at the beautiful St. Thomas University in Miami Gardens, and we thank you for joining. We'll look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you.